we're going again, John.
All right, welcome back, everyone. This is Two Beards in a Bible. I'm John Swano.
And I'm Dave Tenney.
And we are picking up where we left off in Hebrews chapter 5. And
All right.
I believe it's your turn to read.
It's my turn to read, and I only got to read 4 verses.
It always works out.
All right, so I guess to continue, I guess we got to talk about what we talked about just a little bit. We talked about in chapter 4, one of the things we talked about at the end was that Jesus is our high priest, right? And he's the perfect high priest for us because he's able to sympathize with us, because he experienced all of the things that we've experienced in our life, all the temptations, and he was able to overcome them all. So he is able to help us overcome them all. And so now the Hebrew writer is going to continue talking about this high priesthood here in chapter 5. So verse 1, chapter 5, verse 1. Did you have something, John?
No, go ahead. I'm thinking ahead.
He says, for every high priest taken from among men is appointed for men and things pertaining to God, that he may both offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He can have compassion on those who are ignorant and going astray, since he himself is also subject to weakness. Because of this, he is required, as for the people, so also for himself, to offer sacrifice for sins. And no man takes honor to himself, but he who is called by God, just as Aaron was.
Yeah, it's kind of, we kind of ended the last episode with kind of those same thoughts. You know, that Christ is able to be a righteous and compassionate judge because he has experienced the things that we have. As he says there in verse 2, he can have compassion on those who are ignorant and going astray, since he himself is also subject to weakness.
Yeah. I think that's kind of, I think this is the first few verses. I'm going to disagree with you, little John.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I think of verse 1, he starts talking about the high priests that have been chosen previously, right? He says, for every high priest taken from among men, right? So that would be the Levites.
Right.
He says, for men in things pertaining to God, that he may both offer gifts and sacrifices for sin. So the high priest is chosen for men in order to offer the sacrifices to God. And in verse 2, he says, so he can have compassion on those who are ignorant and going astray. So he is the high priest, I think, that was chosen among men. He can have compassion on those who are ignorant and gone astray, since he himself is also subject to weakness. So I think that person there is the high priest that is not Jesus, the ones that were before.
That could be, and in context, that makes some sense. It's interesting, and this could just be a grammatical thing.
Yeah.
Because they're in verse 5 or chapter 5, verse 1. That he, lowercase, may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. Uppercase, he.
Yeah.
That's probably because that's at the beginning of a
probably
sentence.
Because
so it's not speaking of Christ.
So verse 3, because of this, he is required, as for the people, so also for himself, to offer sacrifices for sins. So obviously the high priest was not perfect.
Right.
He was a sinner. He was subject to weaknesses. When he's offering sacrifices for the sins of the people, he should be able to sympathize with them because he's in the same boat they are.
Right. And verse 3, because of this weakness, because of this, he is required, as for the people, so also for himself, to offer sacrifices for sin.
Right. And verse 4 says, and no man takes this honor to himself, but he who was called by God, just as Aaron was. So there was
Right.
obviously there was a way in which God called the high priest.
Right.
Now, I'm not sure.
Trying to think back to how that.
How go through. I know that I know the priesthood all descended from Aaron. But it seems like when you read through those things that God had a hand in selecting who the high priest was.
Right.
But I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert of these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it kind of indicates that here. He says, no man takes this honor to himself, but he who was called by God.
Right.
Which I think would indicate that God had some hand in this.
Right. Yeah. And that's, that I'm trying to think back to, again, just as you said, I can't remember myself how exactly that process took place, but
Right.
obviously it was by God's doing.
You want to read 5 through 11?
Yep, starting at verse 5. So also Christ did not glorify himself to become high priest, but it was he who said to him, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." As he also says in another place, "You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with vehement cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of his godly fear. Though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered, and having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Called by God as high priest, according to the order of Melchizedek, of whom we have much to say, and hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing."
Okay. So, we're going to get into this Melchizedek section. This is tough. I think it's not terribly tough. So let's start at the first verse. He says, so the first 5 verses, he's talking about the priesthood, the high priesthood that descended from Aaron. Mm-hmm. Now he switches and talks about a different priesthood, which is from Christ, right? So he's a different type of high priest than the Aaronic priesthood. So Aaron was from what tribe? Aaron was a Levite. Mm-hmm. Jesus was from the tribe of Judah, mm-hmm. right? The people in the tribe of Judah were not high priests under the old law, right? They weren't in line to be in the priesthood. Mm-hmm. Only the Levites and the descendants of Aaron were priests under the old law. That's an important thing to understand as we start talking about that. Just real basics thing, but an important thing to keep in mind. Verse 5 says, "So also Christ did not glorify himself to become high priest, but it was he who said it to him, 'You are my son, today I have begotten you.' And he also said in another place, 'You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek.'" So Jesus did not come down and try to take the priesthood.
Right.
But it was appointed, had been appointed to him from the beginning of time.
Right.
So it says it was according to the order of Melchizedek. John, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't. I'm forgetting the things that I'd previously learned about this.
Well, one thing about, Melchizedek, we think about Abraham. Mm-hmm. So Melchizedek was the priest of Salem, I believe.
Okay.
Which would have been Jerusalem, right? Okay. But he was a priest there. He was a priest of the Most High God. He was a priest under a different covenant than the Jews were under.
Okay.
So we might think about, a lot of times I think we call it the patriarchal dispensation. So God, after the flood, God had a covenant with man after that. So, Noah would have been under that covenant. and there were sacrifices that were required because Noah offered sacrifice. Noah's way before the old law. And as we go through, we find out that there were, where you might think about Moses' father-in-law was a priest. God had a law for man before the old law was put into place, before the Mosaic law. And this Melchizedek was obviously a priest in that old law. And it's interesting, so he didn't descend. That line of priests, pre-old law, didn't descend from Aaron. Right? They were separate from the old law. And Jesus comes from that line of priests.
Okay.
Right? He doesn't come from the priests under the Mosaic covenant given in, the Pentateuch, but he was from that priesthood that predated that.
So more from the beginning.
Yes, more from the beginning. In fact, Abraham gives tithes to Melchizedek, in Genesis. Right, so Abraham honored this priest, and the Hebrew writer is saying, you know what? Jesus isn't from this other line; he's from the line of Melchizedek.
Right.
So, kind of understanding all of that helps us make sense of the rest of that.
Right.
I hope. So he says, go ahead.
I would say just the other place in Psalm 111 at verse 4, the Lord has sworn and will not relent. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. So that's the other place what it's referring to there in Hebrews.
Yeah, so that's in the Psalms, right? And that's a prophecy concerning Jesus. And I'm sure that the reason the Hebrew writer used these things was to bring their minds back to that psalm,
Right.
which they probably knew.
Right.
Right? So it says, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplication with vehement cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of his godly fear. So it talks about Melchizedek offering sacrifices, and God heard those things. God listened to him and what he said.
Right.
Now I think, and then in verse 8 it says, though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. So now we're talking about Jesus again.
Right.
Right? And having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him.
Right.
That's an important thing to remember.
I think in verse 8, there's something there that, as we read that, Christ learned obedience by the things which he suffered. So that obedience is not always easy.
No.
Obedience is sometimes the last thing that you want to do, just as Christ prayed in the garden.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, so I have a note here. I wrote down Matthew 4, 3 through 11. Some other time I had studied this. I have no idea what this means, but I'll walk over there and see what it says.
Matthew 4, chapter 4, verse 3.
Yeah.
Now when the tempter came to him, he said, if you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. But he answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him up into the holy city, set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he shall give his angels charge over you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. Jesus said to him, it is written again, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. Again the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I will give to you, if you will fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, away with you, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him.
Yeah, so that talks about Jesus learning obedience, right? And these things he suffered. We read that account of Jesus being tempted, and it makes it sound like it only lasted about a couple of minutes.
Right. Right.
But I have a feeling that could have lasted for a couple of days. Right? There was probably a lot more involved than just what's written.
Right.
We're just given the Cliff's Notes version of what happened.
Right. And it's something to think about is that when it was over, Jesus had angels come and minister to him.
Yeah.
So it was probably taxing.
Yes.
It was probably not an easy thing. And again, that lends to the idea that Christ understands.
Right. Absolutely. So he says, and having been perfected, right, because he was the perfect sacrifice. That's how he was perfected. He became the author of eternal salvation to who?
To all who obey him.
So that brings us back to this, that faith has to be obedient. Faith that's not obedient is worthless.
Right.
Faith demands obedience every time.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. Obedient to what, John?
To the gospel.
Absolutely, to the things that were said, right? Right. So I always go back to, people may say, well, you don't have to be baptized to be saved. But Jesus said that we had to be baptized in Mark chapter 16 and verse 16 and Matthew chapter 28, verse 18 through 24. Jesus taught that we had to be baptized. So you're saying you don't have to obey that?
Right.
So, that's a big problem. So obedience, when we talk about obedience, we're talking about being obedient to the things that Jesus said that we're supposed to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Verse 10, he says, called by God as high priest, according to the order of Melchizedek. Right, so that the priesthood that Jesus is part of predates the Aaronic priesthood. That's what
it's the Cliff Notes version.
It's the Cliff Notes version, right? He says, of whom we have much to say and hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. So, these are kind of complicated subjects, but they can be understood, but you have to be able to put the effort in to try to understand them.
Right. And that's one of those, this Melchizedek thing, I'm going to go look into that more, because it's one of those things that I think a lot of times we just buzz over and we just don't think about.
Oh,
because
yeah.
It takes some effort to go search that out. I remember the first time I really heard about that, about the order of Melchizedek, was when this was at Brown Street years and years ago, and there was a visitor that came in, and he introduced himself as a priest of the order of Melchizedek.
Okay.
And I said, alrighty then. Good to meet you. And that sticks in my mind that that he introduced himself that way. But
yeah.
But anyways, that is one of those things that when people look into the scriptures, that may be one of the things that is a hang up, and they're like, well, what does that mean? And that might be something that causes some confusion. So I'm glad we talked about that a little bit, and each of us should go dig into that a little bit more so we have a better understanding of it.
Yeah, I can't remember. For some reason, I really dug into this one time. And it was probably because I didn't understand it. That's typically the way it works for me.
Right.
I'm like, what is this? But yeah, I know one time I did dig into that pretty deep. But, there was definitely some sort of priesthood in place before the Hebrews had a priesthood. And, there's some different examples of that throughout the Old Testament.
Well, that makes sense. When you put everything together and you look at where the powers that be at the time were looking for a priest to come out of and what they expected him to look like, and they were wrong.
Yeah. You even think about the book of Job. I mean, Job, God spoke directly to Job. That's not normal.
Right.
You don't see that. I mean, that's why most people think that Job probably predated all of the law and all of those things. That account is probably an ancient account.
Yeah.
And it probably took place. Job was probably of that priesthood.
And it just reminds you, at the very beginning of Hebrews, God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets,
yes,
has in these last days spoken to us by his Son. So there were other ways in which God operated.
Yes.
Prior to these laws.
Absolutely. And basically the writer of Hebrews is saying, okay, he did it, he's done it different ways, but now he's doing it this way.
Yeah. And he wasn't telling these people anything they didn't already know.
Or they shouldn't already know.
Right.
John, you want to read the last few verses to the end of the chapter?
Yep. So we pick up at verse 12.
Yeah.
For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God, and you have come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food belongs to those who are of full age, that is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil.
Now, I think this is going back to the Melchizedek comment. So he says in verse 10, he says, according to God as high priest, according to the order of Melchizedek, of whom we have much to say and hard to explain, since you become dull of hearing. And then he says, for though by this time you ought to be teachers. And you need someone to teach you again the first principle of the oracles of God. So the Hebrew writer is kind of frustrated with these people that he's talking to, because what he's saying is you ought to already understand all of these things.
Right.
Because these are basic things.
Right.
And yet you don't. So now I've got to go back to the beginning and try to explain the nitty-gritty of these things to you.
Right.
And I'm thankful he did, because we need this milk too.
Right. Right.
So,
well, yeah, and that's again, as you think about, what does it look like today, if for a Christian who is just taking in the milk from God's word.
Well, you never get into the actual hard truths of Christianity. If you're just, if your whole idea of Christianity is just based on God's love,
right? That's exactly what I was
your
thinking
faith in Him. If that's as deep as it goes, you are missing most of it.
The religious world today is full of God is love and God loves you, and we should love each other. And love is a much misunderstood term.
Yeah.
And so that's the milk. All those things are true.
Right.
That God is love and that we should love each other. But the hard part is
the obedience part of it.
Well, what does love look like?
Yeah.
It's not always pretty.
Yeah. And you know what? And if my kids love me, they'll do as I ask them to do.
Right.
And if they don't love me, they won't.
Right.
Well, we don't ever get into these concepts of what love actually is. Love works both ways. God always loves us. God always wants us to do His will. But we have to love Him back.
If you love your children, you're going to discipline them. You're going to tell them that if you drink 7 gallons of chocolate milk in a day, it's going to be bad for you.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to tell them the things they don't want to hear.
Yeah.
And that is, again, that's the solid food.
So where's the limit? Is 6 the limit?
Yeah, it's probably 3.
It's probably 3 is the limit. Not that you've tested it.
No.
Yeah. So, Right. So he says here, you have come to need milk and not solid food. What does he mean by that?
You know, when a baby is born of any animal, really, when you stop and think about it, they nurse off of their mother, and they need that milk has the nutrients to get things started. But if you give a baby lasagna, you're going to have a rough night. You know, it's going to be bad because they're
not ready for
their
it.
bodies are not able to process and break those things down. And as Christians, you know, when we begin our path as a Christian, there are things that we can't process right now because we don't have the background of the things that, you know, lead up to that. But it takes time, and then we can process through those things, and we can understand the word as the Lord wrote it.
Yeah, absolutely. He says, for everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. Mm-hmm. Right. So if you are not growing, right, if you are not maturing in taking in the solid food, mm-hmm. the deeper things in Scripture, then you are unskilled in the word of right. That means you can't defend the faith.
Yeah.
Because you don't have the tools to do it.
And if you consider yourself religious and you go to some assembly, some religious assembly, and in doing so, you always come out without a conviction. You know, you never come out thinking, boy, I need to change some things in my life. You just come out with that warm, fuzzy feeling, then you're doing it wrong. Yeah. I mean, as a preacher, one of the things that I really want to hear and I hope to hear from people is, you know, you made me think today, or I need to really think about these things.
Right.
You know, it's what we all, and even as the preacher, you've got to think about how you can do better.
Yeah.
You've got to constantly dig into, you know, if you really start studying the Bible, there's not a person on earth that isn't going to find something that convicts them. Yeah. Cuts them to the heart and realize that, you know, I need to change some things.
And one of the other things is too, is as you increase your knowledge in the Bible, now I've been basically studying the Bible for about 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I am not afraid to discuss Bible topics with anybody.
Right.
I'll discuss them with the Catholic priest.
Right.
I'll discuss them with the Bible scholar. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that I understand the entire Word of God perfectly.
Right.
But I have a level of a knowledge of it that I'm confident in. The things I do know, I'm very confident in. Mm-hmm. So, you know, and anybody can do this.
And you have your, you know, in verse 14, it speaks of by reason of use. Yeah. Have their senses exercised. And, you know, when you are, for instance, speaking to some of these religious leaders from various religious groups, when you get into the parts of their doctrine that do not align with the Scriptures, you can then pick that out.
Yes.
If you're by reason of use, if you've exercised your mind with the Word, when those things come up, you'll say, oh, that's not the way.
That doesn't sound right.
Yeah. You might not understand it completely at the moment. You might have to go do some digging, but you'll be able to say, oh, my hackles are up on that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and sometimes the best defense for some of those things is just to act dumb and say, yeah, can you explain that to me? Because I don't see that.
Right.
And usually the deeper and deeper you start digging, the more and more that argument falls apart.
If it's not the truth, you know, they'll hang themselves on their own.
Absolutely.
On their own misunderstandings.
Yeah. He says, but solid food belongs to those who are of full age, that is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. And as John just mentioned, you know, when you're studying with somebody, you hear something that's not right, your cackles are up. You immediately say, okay, that doesn't sound like what the Bible teaches.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful about those things.
There have been several times, I'm sure you've had experiences like this, where you're walking through a city and you come upon a situation or a person or some people, and your senses just pick up that this is not a good place to be.
Yeah.
And almost everybody has some sort of a sense in that way that this is not a safe situation. This is not a good situation. I'm going to remove myself from this.
Yes.
And the same thing happens to us spiritually when we exercise our minds with the Word.
Yep. John, we better stop right here.
All right. Well, we've said enough, so we'll see you next time in Hebrews chapter 6.